views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. The Bronx is known as the Borough of Universities. At last count, there are 13 colleges and universities in the Bronx, and they include the full range: public colleges, private colleges, a for-profit, a medical school, a religious college, and a maritime college. Tonight's question is about those Bronx institutions of higher learning and also about colleges and universities in general. How are they doing? Tonight's guests have put out an essay series called Stepping Away from the Brink, and that studied the state of higher education, and they've got concerns about whether those institutions are delivering on the promise of educating and training students for the future, how they're managed and operated, and certainly, parents, hold your breath, over the financing of our institutions of higher learning. And tonight they're prepared to review the state of higher education and offer ideas on how to do better. So please join me in welcoming an assistant professor of public administration at LIU Brooklyn and the executive director of the Bronx PIC, the Bronx Private Industry Council, Dr. Edward Summers. Nice to have you with us, Dr. Summers.
Thank you. It's great to be
And
here.
also an associate dean of the School for Business at Metropolitan College of New York, one of the Bronx colleges, and senior fellow at the Dubois Bunch Center for Public Policy, Dr. Leslie Branch. Nice to have you with us, Dr. Branch.
Thank you, Gary.
Dr. Summers, let's start with you. What motivated this essay series and the fact that you and Dr. Branch got together and said, maybe we ought to put something out? What made you say this is the right time to do this?
Sure. So I've worked in higher education for over 15 years, and I've worked at a variety of different institutions. Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York, which is my alma mater, which is a mid-sized university, sort of a comprehensive university that has now a medical school attached to it. I've worked at a small private liberal arts college called Union College in Schenectady, New York, that had a population of about 2,200 students. And I've worked at big institutions such as Stony Brook on Long Island, which is a big comprehensive university.
But that's also a SUNY school,
It's a SUNY school,
compared to
right.
Marist and compared to the other.
Absolutely.
I mean, so he's also done the full range. By the way,
Correct.
I do want to mention people who are interested in the list of what are the 13 colleges in the Bronx. We'll do that right at the end of the show, so stick around. Go ahead,
Great.
I'm sorry.
No problem, Gary. And so I've worked at Stony Brook, and then I've worked at Long Island University. I've since left Long Island University. It's a bigger, larger university with two major campuses, one in Brooklyn and one in Long Island. And so based on all of those experiences, I reflected recently when I came to the Bronx to build up the Bronx Private Industry Council, which is powered by Here to Here. I really reflected with my colleague Leslie and another colleague, Adriel Hilton, about the state of higher education and the tremendous challenges that higher education is faced with. Particularly, we've known that there were going to be a major demographic shift in the Northeast. We've known that for a while.
But let's break that down. From what
Sure.
to what?
So we've known that that the number of high school students have declined. So back in about 2009, there have been several reports that indicated that we would see a reduction of about 20% of the number of students who are graduating from high schools decline. So we would see a 20% decrease in the number of students in the Northeast. And so
Let me interject then. So that would suggest that the population at colleges would be older because it would be people who are going back to
to schools,
college
correct.
as opposed to the traditional high school student graduating high school.
Absolutely.
So that's the demographic shift,
Absolutely.
demographic shift you were talking about.
Absolutely. And we know also that we have the cost of higher ed has increased dramatically since the 1970s and 80s. I mean, there was a report that indicated it's increased by 300% since the 70s, and so the cost has gone up as well. And quite honestly, I think higher ed has become too bloated. We've had so many different institutions. We've had competition from for-profit institutions, competition from code academies. So the education sector has bloated itself.
And so with all these factors going in there, is your sense that institutions of higher learning understand how to move toward this shift in the way things are, the more expensive, the fact that the demographics are changing and all those kinds of things? I guess it's rhetorical because he's going, yeah.
So I think that's part of the challenge, and that's what motivated us to write this series. Is that what we've been seeing over the last 2 years, in particular, is that colleges have been faced with major financial challenge. Enrollment has declined. A lot of institutions have thought about associating, merging, and/or closing, and we've seen over the last 2 years more than 20 institutions close, merge, or associate with another institution.
Which is significant, and so you say, well, 20, looking at the the whole scope of it, but think of those 20 communities that have lost an institution of higher learning.
Well, and that's most important. It's the economic impact to the local community. It's the young people who are attending, and not so young people that are attending these places, that now have to figure out, what do I do?
Dr. Branch, boy, he asked the question. So what do they do? What about access to higher education in the Bronx? And in the scope of these things that Dr. Summers has talked about, where are we at? Do we have a chance to adapt? Are we adapting? Are some places adapting? Are we well behind the eight ball? Give us an assessment of that.
So I would suggest that it is high time for colleges in the Bronx to adapt. If they don't, they will become the next Blockbuster. And by that, I mean, if they don't pay attention to what's happening in the market, they will be phased out of business.
Well, these are kind of strong words. I mean, institutions, let's start with the public colleges, Lehman College and Hostos and Bronx Community College. I hear all the time that they are, let's say, reformatting toward, let's say, more vocational training, more direct job development and career training. Certainly STEM has been an emphasis. Lehman College added a science building, so that's a little, it's a little more highfalutin, but it certainly hasn't increased their range. What kinds of things, if we want to separate the publics from the others, do they need to do to keep pace with some of the changing issues?
So that's a great question. And again, because of these shocks to the industry, these pressures that are put on institutions by competitors such as code academies, as Dr. Summers mentioned, if they don't adapt and give to students or prepare students for the types of educational opportunities that the market are demanding, they're going to go out of business. And so they are directly being forced to compete as a result of, I would suggest, exogenous factors. And so in that way, they're paying attention to what the demand is from the market, but also from students themselves.
And it brings up another thing, and actually, Dr. Summers, we're going to get to you about it because you're involved in the hiring and the training of Bronx young people with Bronx PIC and the other things. But you mentioned code academies. There's online universities, there's boot camps, and all these other things that compete. It's ironic to me that these large institutions, and not only public colleges in the Bronx, but all over the country, rather than the others competing with them, it's like now they're in the position of almost being defensive to be competing with online institutions. It's almost like the tail wagging the dog, so to speak. You would think that the onlines and others would say, gee, we've got to do more. Instead, they stay focused, and these large institutions have to, kind of squeeze down. Do I have that right?
I would suggest you do. We're all competing for the same fish in the same pond, so to speak. And it's just about how one strategizes to get at those fish. Mm-hmm. And so the publics and some of the onlines are able to leverage strengths that they have. Mm-hmm. They don't have the high overhead costs that some of the brick and mortar institutions have. Right. And just from my perspective and research, I think that if we cooperated more rather than competed against one another, we could have better outcomes for everyone, and we could maybe perhaps stem the tide of closures that we're seeing, which are having a negative impact on the end result, the end user, which is the student.
Dr. Summers, let's just look at that, at the job market and the training of young people for the job market. If you are a student, and I was an English major in college, and you want to be an English major or you want to be in the social sciences of some sort, you really have a hard time thinking, when your parents say, what are you going to do when you graduate, justifying maybe paying a lot of money for college, because there really isn't a clear pathway of how you're going to get that job. Maybe there was in the past. And that's, I think, why these onlines and coding and everything else that's going on are like, hey, come to us, we'll get you that training, and you can have the pipeline to a job, where somebody who gets a regular baccalaureate in sociology, for example, is going to be like, now what do I do? Now maybe I'm going to have to go get a financial education so I can work in the finance industry. I've laid it out for you.
Yes, no. I think it's a great point, and that's what we're trying to change here in the Bronx with the Bronx Private Industry Council and Here to Here and CareerWise New York. We're really focused on reaching young people at the high school level versus the college level. We are very focused on making sure that they have as much exposure to careers and occupations as much as possible, because there's a difference between a career and an occupation. So we are very focused on working with educators and employers in the Bronx to make sure that we're providing training and exposure to careers early on, so young people can make decisions about what they want to do. Do they want to go into the job market after they leave high school? Do they want to go to post-secondary, to college or university? So we want to make sure that they have as much exposure as possible, not only just visiting a company, but actually interning at a company at a young age.
So does a large institution, and let's keep it Bronx, so you're talking
Yes.
Fordham University or Manhattan College, Lehman College for the four-year institution, public institutions, do they have to do something to adapt to the market, or is it that in a way the market and the people training the young people like yourself and the high schools have to adapt from their end? In other words, who has to make the change, and if so, certainly on the college level, what do they need to do?
I think it's a conversation all around and across and through. I think the colleges definitely have to adapt to the market. As Dr. Branch said, if they don't adapt to the market, they'll be out of business, and they'll see a major decline in their enrollments. And I think there needs to be better connectivity among the institutions in the Bronx with not only themselves, but with employers, with government, with nonprofit organizations, and with the high schools to better think about what is our Bronx strategy. I fundamentally believe that we're stronger together in the Bronx, and that if we...
Well, you won't get an argument from anybody on just about any subject.
right.
And I've been sitting in this chair for a long time, and there is now that feeling that it's got to be this.
We have to come together, and I see it from also an economics perspective, right? My dissertation was on economic development in the Hudson Valley, and I'm starting to see the economic growth and vitality of the Bronx. And here is the time now that we need to come together collectively as a community to think about what's our Bronx strategy. And
What's the path?
What's the path forward for the Bronx?
And also for Bronx youngsters,
Young-
whether it's at the high school level or the 22-year-old
That's right.
that's going back to school.
Absolutely.
Dr. Branch, let's just talk about the finances a little bit, and I'm going to reveal what people who may be of my generation. When I went to Lehman College, and some of the young people who work here at BronxNet Television will faint when I say this, but the college was free.
Right.
It was literally, you may have applied to schools elsewhere, but if you didn't get in, it was almost like going from junior high school to high school. You just simply were admitted to one of the public colleges, and you could begin, and it didn't cost you anything. You just went in. And a side note, I remember when they imposed a $75 activities fee, there were protests. People were marching. You can't charge us. But now, of course, the financial burden for even the public colleges is significant to students. How do we deal with that? And that's really at the base level. You look at private colleges, the for-profit, and universities are $50,000, $60,000 a year. It's crazy money.
So one of the things that we do at Metropolitan College of New York is we have accelerated programs. So rather than it taking 4 years to get a bachelor's degree, a person who comes in with no college credits can get their degree in 2 years and 8 months. if a person transports in college credits, that lessens the time and therefore the amount that they would have to pay.
And that's addressing those, again, I'll use a generality of those 22 and 23-year-olds who may be coming back because they did a little college and then they maybe had a family. I mean, these things go on all the time.
Well, I mean, it addresses that demographic, but it also addresses the demographic who are just graduating from high school.
Let's continue on this line about the cost of college then. I know my daughter went to a university, and I will be paying off that loan, or my grandkids will probably pay off that loan eventually. People aren't fully educated, I think, on what the long-term implications are. They say, hey, you pay, whatever a month, and it looks good now, but in 5 years or 10 years, and you're still paying it, and they pay the interest first, and they never pay down the original investment. I mean, these are predatory loans. And the federal government is not helping. They're pulling back on funding and all these things. Give us the scope of what needs to be done now for all of us in higher education.
Well, costs definitely need to be stabilized. That and how that happens is a strategy of leadership, as we talk about in our Stepping Away from the Brink series. What I would suggest is that because the public colleges, the CUNYs at least here in New York City, have I believe it's not necessarily the free tuition, the Excelsior program, that is going to cause a lot of colleges who compete directly with them to think about how they can restructure their own tuition, because what might be happening is students who would go to private colleges may now be choosing some of the CUNYs if they are able to get the Excelsior scholarship. And so I would suggest that.
So in other words, that is a classic competition of every sort. In other words, we've lowered the price here, we've made it accessible, Excelsior, and therefore, if you want to compete and if you want these students to come to your institution, you got to compete in some form.
You have to compete, and whether that is, freezing tuition at a particular rate. So if you come in at this tuition, this will be the tuition that you pay over your hopefully accelerated period here, because we are creating a strategy where you can spend less than 4 years to earn your degree. I think on average, if I'm not mistaken, and Dr. Summers, you can correct me, on average it takes maybe 6 years to get a bachelor's degree, but by creating a strategy whereby students can come in and have a tailored degree that doesn't deviate left or right, but just takes them straight down the middle to graduation, that's a cost savings as well.
Dr. Summers, this leads us into the question about leadership, and leadership has to understand a lot of aspects of it. Part of it is the financial ramifications of everything you do. Listen, let's face it, big universities are bloated, and they're bloated at the top. People are making a lot, administrators are making a lot of money. It's not money that's directly put into the classroom. You've got tenured professors, and I know I have many friends who are professors, and they're going to hate me for saying this, but there's a lot of money wrapped up in this stuff, and then all of a sudden, instead of teaching 4 classes, they're teaching 2 classes, and maybe they are research institutions. I mean, again, I don't want to cut down anybody individually, but there is a vision that there's money out there in some cloud that is where a lot of the financial resources are going. Do I have that right?
You do, and I think that going back to something that Dr. Branch said, as what institutions have to do is really think about sort of their structure and their models. I think that what tends to happen is we do get wrapped up in these conversations about we have tenured faculty and they're teaching 2 or 3 classes. I think it's really about thinking about the structure of an institution that leaders have to do, and really think about like what is the value that we're providing to our students and our graduates and our alums. I think that's what's going to stave off institutions from stepping on the brink. I think that part of it is that while there is a lot of money at the top, I think that your human resources are your best value at an institution. So your faculty, if you have really good faculty, that is a major asset for an institution to be able to attract students. Because I know when I was at LIU, Long Island University, I had students begging to get into my classes. And so I think that while there's this misnomer that there's money, I think that faculty and leaders bring tremendous value to an institution, and that's why you need to spend those resources in order to be able to make sure that you're staying away from the brink. So I think that depending on your model and the value that you bring, will determine where finances are directed at an institution.
One of the things that you folks mentioned in your Stepping Away from the Brink essays, we were talking about this before the show, it was so logical. I was reading it and saying, why do we have to say it? But you literally made the point that custodians have an effect on whether students stay in college. And other people who do maintenance jobs and service jobs and any other kind of thing, even the people who work in a cafeteria, these are people who also affect the popularity of a college, the nature of a college, the feeling at a college, and, well, of course, but it needs to be said, right?
No, it needs to be said, and they need to be engaged, and they need to feel that they're valued at the institution. Having worked at a place like Marist College and Union College, I could tell you I worked directly for the presidents at both those respective institutions, and our approach was we always said hi to everyone. We always engaged everyone. We knew about their families.
But you see, that's creating a culture, and that's an
That's right.
important thing for really anything. You work at Verizon or you work at Optimum or wherever you work.
Absolutely.
If you create that culture, it helps every aspect of your business.
Absolutely, because then everyone has buy-in into the future of the institution. So everyone takes their position seriously. So all of a sudden, you could be a secretary and you see a paper, which matters at college campuses. You see a paper on the floor, you're going to pick it up because you care about the institution. Because it's that family, that sense of family at the institution. And you care about whether the place is successful or not, because that means that if the place is not successful, you're not successful. And so
a lot of colleges preach it. Very few are able to deliver on it. Dr. Branch, it brings us into a whole aspect of what you folks wrote about, which is leadership. One of the things you documented was that 20 college presidents have stepped down over time. Could be for any number of reasons. I mean, even at Lehman College, president was, offered a position at CUNY Central, and so he left, even though he had only been here for a short period of time. Talk to me about the kind of the leadership void. Is there a leadership void, and how do we keep college presidents being vital and able to really, instead of being, symbolic, but really being involved and able to lead an institution?
So something that comes to mind is an article that was written by Gloria Ladson-Billings. And in that article, she said that if a person's teacher looked like them, that person would tend to be more successful.
Specifically, ethnically, we're talking about
Yes.
people of color.
And so as institutions diversify in their student bodies, I would suggest that leadership needs to mirror that diversity. And we use this word diversity and we, throw it around, but at the end of the day, if you don't have diversity's partner, which is inclusion, you don't have a winning formula.
A sense of identity.
A sense of identity, someone that you can...
Or also someone that understands.
That can connect with you, right? Not just in academics, but that understands the challenges that you face on a day-to-day to even exist in the academy.
It's something that I'm, of course, always involved in thinking about our Bronx community. What about the engagement with the community? You could, and now the Bronx may be a little different from all over America, from Mississippi State or something, but to what degree does the college need to reflect the area around it, and what kinds of things should a college do to kind of blend the community so it is a larger college community?
So it goes back to what Dr. Summers, Dr. Hilton, and myself wrote in the series of essays. We definitely need to form partnerships, community partnerships. We need to not be so siloed. One of the things that MCNY does is we partner with community organizations, community agencies. We are partners with the Bronx PIC. We are partners with the Knowledge House and others in the Bronx to draw on one another's strengths, but also to be supportive in one another's endeavors, because we know at the end of the day, we all are helping the same community.
You know, I'll single out a couple, but of course, out of the 13 institutions, many do it. But Hostos Community College has a wonderful arts programs and of course, the Longwood Arts Gallery is there and theater programs. These are the kinds of things that really blend it. And I'll also single out a Metropolitan College. They use on 149th Street that kind of auditorium they have for all kinds of events. You know, whether it be technology summits or, you know, healthcare summits I've seen there. I mean, all kinds of things. That's the kind of thing you're talking about.
That is exactly what I'm talking about. And then again, at the end of the day, it's about collective effort and collective action. Without it, we all get nowhere. But together, if we work together, we can all get somewhere.
Dr. Summers, this will be the last question before we run out of time. I once had a conversation with an educator, a college educator, who said, you know, there's enough students for everybody. We got to stop competing and just get everybody to want to come to college. I think that's a nice way to conclude this, that opportunities are there if even institutions work together.
I think that's critical to thinking about the future of the Bronx in particular, thinking about our ecosystem in Bronx. I think that if we work more closely together, we can build an ecosystem that rivals any other borough or any other state, to be honest with you. I think we have talented people here in the Bronx that are very committed to the Bronx. The one thing, and some folks will not like this word, I'm born and raised in the Bronx, South Bronx, still live in my same neighborhood. We have a lot of grit to us in the Bronx. And I think that if we use that collective
Giddy up, I'm right on it.
That's right. If we use that collective ingenuity to
I like that.
come together as a community, I think that we can build a very strong Bronx that allows people to stay in their community, be educated, and get connected to employment opportunities.
Employment opportunities in their
Right
community,
here in the
so we
community.
get educated, even like I did. I went to Lehman, and here I am working.
Right. And it helps businesses at the end of the day, right?
Dr. Eddie Summers, thank you so much. Dr. Leslie
pleasure.
Branch, thank you so much. As things change, as things develop, we hope you'll come back and join us. Now, I promised that we're going to review the list of Borough of Universities in the Borough of Universities. So we do have a list, and maybe we could pop that list up there and take a look. There we go. So you got Lehman College, Bronx Community, and Hostos, which are obviously the three public colleges. Then Manhattan College in Fordham, Mount St. Vincent over there in Riverdale, SUNY Maritime in the East Bronx, Borough, which is down in the South Bronx. Mercy College has an East Bronx campus, Metropolitan College on 149th Street, Monroe College at Fordham. Now, these are the two that people forget. The Albert Einstein College of Medicine. We have a medical school here in the Bronx, a wonderful one, as a matter of fact. And then there's also a religious institution, the Yeshiva of Tel Shei Alumni is in Riverdale. So that's part of, you know, kind of the notion of religious institutions. Of course, Fordham University and Manhattan are Jesuit universities as well. Anyway, thank you, folks, for joining us. Thank you for embellishing our notion of the Borough of Universities. And, folks, if you have further comments or questions on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, email them to us at BronxTalk@BronxNet.org. Send us a tweet at BronxTalk, and you can also post them on our Facebook page. We thank our producer, is Helen Greenberg. Our director is Nick Marrero. Next week, it'll be another show.